Can you hear me okay? Yes? Fantastic. I should start by divulging that as of last Saturday, I did not know I was coming to Munich for the first time. I had not planned to speak at 48 Forward, but one of my colleagues was unable to attend, so I raised my hand and said, yes, first trip to Munich, sign me up. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind. Yes, thank you. So I'd like to start by just thanking Daniel and the conference organizers, the city of Munich, and most importantly, my local team here for the warm welcome. Have absolutely loved the first few days in the city and hope to come back when I can spend some more time. But today I want to talk to you about why this is the year that innovation meets ethics, and specifically look at the three things that drive how both consumers and business decision makers perceive brands. First, a little bit about us. My name is Matthew Ashworth. I'm the general manager for We Communications Seattle office in the States. We are a global communications agency that sits at the intersection of people, brands, and technology. We have about 950 employees across the globe operating in 100 markets, including a great office just down the street in the Maxvorstadt neighborhood. And what we really do is help brands try to navigate the motion around them, the motion of the industry, the motion of the world, and help them reach their audiences anywhere, anyhow, through any channel. And at the end of the day, we believe that the power of integrated communications can really impact how consumers and business decision makers perceive our brand and the brands of our clients. Speaking of clients, we have about 100 client partners across the globe, including some of the world's biggest brands, McDonald's, Microsoft, Volvo. And it's really an interesting time for brands right now, where technology is disrupting every industry. Consumer expectations of what they need from brands is through the roof. And so at the end of the day, we really look at our role and our goal to use our gift of communications to move people to positive action in the world. So I think it's important to understand a little bit of the context in which our audiences are operating right now, in which they are building their perceptions about us, our brands, and the things that we do. And it's been quite a year when it comes to big moments that impact people's perceptions. We had Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica scandal and a host of other sort of data privacy issues that are really eroding trust in technology. There is Brexit and the future of the EU, international debate on immigration, large nations involved in trade wars, the Me Too movement. The point is just there are a lot of big moments in time happening right now that are impacting how brands are perceived. I'm sure my friends here in Germany are sick of hearing about Dieselgate, but I think it's important to note because I think it's an example of what can happen when a brand is caught flat-footed during a time of crisis. And today for brands, I believe it's not a matter of if crisis is going to hit, but when. And so what we're going to talk about a little bit today is how we can be prepared and insulate ourselves in the stories we tell so that consumer perception can hold through a crisis like the one that Volkswagen experienced. So in this world of technological disruption, of very high consumer expectations, of lots of big moments shaping our world, we believe that the old notion of brand positioning is dead. No longer can a company pick its spot in the marketplace and hunker down along a single attribute and say, we're going to be the value player, or we're going to be the service player. The world is moving too quickly and changing too quickly. So our theory is that brand positioning has given way to brand motion. And so the study that we do yearly called Brands in Motion is designed to test that hypothesis, the hypothesis that all brands are in motion and that that motion is relative to the markets in which they sit, the category they are a part of, their competition, their employees and investors, and most importantly, their current and future customers. So the goal of Brands in Motion is to quantify consumer perception so that we can help brands navigate that motion. So a bit about the study itself and the study design. We poll 27,000 respondents in partnership with our research partner, YouGov. That's a mix of consumers and business decision makers. We ask them about 90 brands, about 8 industry categories, and we field the survey in 8 global markets. And specifically, what we ask are a series of 10 questions designed to gauge their rational response to brands, and another 10 questions to gauge their emotional response to brands. The findings of this study, both the 2017 and 2018 version, are available on our website, and I will tweet that out if folks are interested. But today, I want to focus on one of the main set of findings, which is that the survey tells us that in this world of constant motion, our audiences are demanding 3 things: functionality, ethics, and purpose. Let's define what we mean by those. Functionality is what the brand delivers. It's your product or service. The ethics is the how you do business. Do you have an ethical supply chain? How do you treat your customers, employees, and partners? And most importantly, recently, how are you using technology, and are you keeping my privacy in mind and protecting my personal data? And the third thing that audiences want from brands is purpose. The bigger question of why do you exist, and what is your role, your bigger role in the world? So if we break those down a bit, let's start first with the what and the functionality. Our survey results showed that just from 2017 to 2018, consumer expectations of brands rose dramatically, meaning it's harder now for a brand to win consumer affection and ultimately their business in 2018 than it was in 2017. But what we noticed was that the demand for that functional connection went up more dramatically than the emotional connection. And what that tells us is we're really in a show, don't tell type of an environment right now. Don't tell me you're a cutting-edge, innovative company. Show me how you're using technology to innovate and to make my life better. A recent example, Apple. So during the CES conference, the big consumer electronics conference at the start of the year in the US, Apple bought up a bunch of billboards with a message focused on privacy. Tactically, this was a fantastic move. Apple was not presenting at the conference. They were not showcasing at the conference. They bought these billboards and really entered one of the main storylines surrounding the conference about privacy. However, it did cause skeptics to question whether Apple's boasts about security matched actually how they were keeping their customers' information safe. Fast forward to a couple weeks ago, and a story broke that a 14-year-old had discovered a security vulnerability in their FaceTime product. Apple took a lot of flack, and many of the journalists that wrote about it sort of compared these two things as, you said this, but you didn't do this. Definitely, I think, an example of Apple telling us that they care about privacy as opposed to showing us. And I just think about how my own perception would have been drastically different had Apple proactively said, we have identified a vulnerability in the FaceTime product. Here's what you need to do to keep yourself safe. We are issuing a software update to protect it, and thank you to a member of our community who helped us identify this and keep people safe. Now to the how, or the ethics. In our survey, 97% of respondents across the globe said they think brands have the responsibility to use technology ethically. That on its own is probably not that surprising. Of course, we want companies to use technology ethically, but what was more surprising to me was that 94% say if companies can't demonstrate that they use technology ethically and protect our privacy, that they're comfortable with government stepping in to regulate. So we're really in a time right now where for brands using technology, it's regulate your use of it or expect to be regulated. Best example of this, I think, is Facebook. We all know that Facebook has had sort of a litany of privacy issues and scandals over the last year. Their CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, testified in front of Congress in the US. There are a lot of journalists, media outlets, and consumers calling for regulation of Facebook. However, nothing has happened in that regard yet. Again, fast forward to a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was fascinating that Apple decided to regulate Facebook on their own. And they basically said, we are not happy with how Facebook is using their research app to target teens and tweens to get their data. And so we are going to shut off their research app so that they can't use our products for this behavior. So really fascinating example of industry partners starting to regulate each other in their use of technology. Moving now to the third thing the audiences want from brands, the why, this sort of bigger purpose in society. 83% of our respondents said that brands have the capability to provide stability in a tumultuous, uncertain world. And that could be simply by reliably and authentically delivering a service we can rely on, but also increasingly it's people calling for brands to stand up and take a stand on important issues happening in our world. An example of this is the campaign Nike launched last year. So Colin Kaepernick is a quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, an American football team. And he started a trend last year where he took a knee during the national anthem before the games in protest of the treatment of African Americans in our country. Very, very polarizing issue and polarizing figure. And I think 20 years ago, a major brand like Nike would say, stay away from that. That's too controversial. That potentially alienates some of my customer base. But Nike looked inside and said, our values align with what Colin Kaepernick represents. We are going to take a stand and boldly put him front and center for our campaign. And the results were phenomenal. They have had 9% lift in revenue, stock prices up, and their brand index scores are up. So a great example of how brands can provide stability in a world full of motion. So further, not only did our study indicate that there are 3 things that consumers and business decision makers expect and want from brands, but that there is a hierarchy or an order in which those things have importance. And so taking a page from psychology here, does everybody remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Right, so Maslow was a psychologist. He said there is a hierarchy of human needs. At the bottom is survival. You got to be alive before you can worry about your basic food, shelter, clothing. You have to meet those needs before you can move on to relationships and happiness. And at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization. So if we lay out these 3 attributes based on what our survey says, the hierarchy of brand perception looks like this. At the bottom is the what or the functionality. So this makes sense. It's table stakes that you as a brand are delivering a product or service that people care about. Nobody cares about their ethics if they're not interested in your product or what you have to offer. Then, once people believe you're delivering good functionality, I'm using your product, I believe that you are innovating to bring me better and better functionality in my life. Then moving up the pyramid is ethics in the how. Again, this is things like, do you have an ethical supply chain? Are you treating your customers, employees, and partners with respect? And are you protecting my privacy through your use of technology? And then, as if that's not enough for brands to meet the needs of those 2 things already, for brands to be successful long-term in the marketplace and continue to win consumer affection, they also have to demonstrate a purpose and a sense of why. For those of you that work in the marketing or PR industry like me, if you've paid attention to Cannes the last few years, all of the main award submissions are built around purpose-driven campaign. There's increasingly a call for brands to have this bigger purpose in the world. So this is the hierarchy of brand perception. Let's take a look at a couple of brands and how we might talk about them in this dynamic. First of all, let's start with Amazon. So not just because I'm from Seattle, but I love Amazon and the functionality they bring me. They make my life easier, and I believe that whenever Amazon moves into a different category, I assume what they bring is going to work until I'm shown otherwise. However, recently, Amazon's ethics have been called into question. There's been stories about their payment or pay for their workers. There's been stories about the treatment of workers in their warehouse facilities, and there are a number of privacy issues in different markets that they're dealing with right now. And so I think as a communicator, I would counsel Amazon that right now they may be able to get away with mostly talking about functionality, because in a lot of the categories they play in, there isn't another alternative, a competitor, a different brand I can go to with better ethics. However, as soon as there is, that's where Amazon will be vulnerable, when somebody delivers that same level of functionality with a better ethical record. And some of you may have noticed that when Apple hit the $1 trillion market cap, they did a big purpose campaign, and they made all these donations to nonprofits in markets where they're trying to have a bigger presence. They flew a plane to Australia and donated $150 million. And what I would tell Amazon is, that's great, but if you listen to the hierarchy of consumer needs, you shouldn't be focused on purpose, you should be focused on ethics. I don't care how you're trying to save the world until I know that you are treating your employees and partners ethically. Moving along to Uber. So I had a fascinating conversation with one of the brand managers at Uber at a conference in Seattle at the end of last year. And I definitely think Uber has functionality down. They have completely disrupted a category, changed the way we order for pay car service. However, they too have had some ethical considerations with Me Too type scandals, with privacy issues. And when I talked to Elise, the brand manager, I said, how is your company thinking about its communication program right now? And she said that since their new CEO, Dara, came on board, 100% of the conversation has been around ethics, starting with how are we going to define the company we want to be and the ethics we have as a company internally so that that can be real and true, and then we can broadcast that to the marketplace. And if you pay attention to the advertising and the stories that Uber is telling in the marketplace right now, all of them are not about their functionality, they're about their ethics. Then an example at the top of the pyramid, Tom's Shoes. Tom's Shoes is a brand that was built initially on a purpose premise, and that for every pair of shoes bought, a pair of shoes would be donated to somebody in a developing country who doesn't have them and needs them. I love that premise. They were very successful early on, especially in getting, I think, attention and buzz, but lately their business is struggling. And the reason it's struggling is because people are starting to wonder if they really make the best shoes. And so an example of a brand that focuses first on purpose but doesn't back up with functionality is therefore vulnerable to a more established brand making a better product who also is going to decide to have a bigger purpose in what they offer. A couple of brands that I think are doing really well and firing on all cylinders. I don't say Microsoft just because Microsoft is our largest client, although it may impact my point of view. But Microsoft is really doing a great job of demonstrating the functionality of their products, continuing to innovate and move from devices into cloud. They are a leader when it comes to ethics and technology and asking for standards to be set around things like facial recognition. And they have a larger purpose around using computing products to help those with disabilities. And the other one is Toyota. Definitely feels like Toyota is a leader in the automotive industry, firing on all three cylinders of this brand perception hierarchy. So, at the end of the day, as communicators, I believe that brands need to be able to tell all three of these stories. So to cut through the noise of a world in motion, of a world driven by exponential consumer expectations, brands need to be prepared and willing to tell stories that bring these three attributes to life at any time. And as marketers and communicators, it's our job to study what's happening in the market and the motion that's happening in the world and know how to execute on these stories. Thank you very much. I think I've got some time Maybe time for 1 or 2 questions. 5 minutes for any questions, comments, disagreements, poking holes. Yes?
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, which was very interesting. I was wondering if ethics and purpose are becoming so important for companies and for their brands. How do you explain that maybe, for example, Facebook didn't have a massive loss in users after the analytics scandal, and Amazon as well? Why is it still so important and so big, and basically doesn't seem to have any losses whatsoever? And can that be explained maybe that purpose and ethics, of course, is important, but rather to, let's say, people who maybe have a good income and maybe with an academically background, who are conscious about their data and conscious about their health and all that, that for them purpose and ethics are a big role in choosing their companies, but for, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but for the masses, it still doesn't really, isn't that important as you have pointed out now today. Thank you.
Yeah, let me play back the question. I think you're basically asking for companies like Facebook and Amazon, who maybe their ethics are in question, how come it isn't impacting their business results? Exactly, yeah. So I knew I was going to get asked that question. And you know, I think all of this is in, we have to take it relative to the marketplace in competition. And in both of those cases, like I said before, I think in Amazon's case, there are many things where I cannot simply say, I don't agree with their ethics, so I'm going to go over here to get this service. Same thing with Facebook, and why I believe that regulation is necessary for Facebook. Yes, there are other social platforms we could go to, but they have such a large market share and such a draw where I don't want to be on Facebook necessarily, but I need to be because people I need to interact with are there, is what keeps me there. I think that they have yet to really experience the negative impact of their ethical choices, and we're just sort of starting to see the start of that. And competition as well as regulation are two things that hopefully will force them to pay attention a little bit more to their ethics. Yes?
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. If I might respond to the last question, I think what you were referring to is lock-in effect. That's mainly what it's happening with Facebook or Amazon or all these big social platforms. I mean, we as consumers, even if we are informed, if we drop out, then what? You're kind of disconnected. That's the beauty of, I mean, from an economic point of view, that's what it's called lock-in effect. That's why, for instance, we have a decision today from the competition authorities here in Germany who are forcing Facebook not to collect certain data through the liking button, and Facebook is going to appeal the decision. So, I mean, I think that's one of the things that it's also happening. I mean, it's communications are important, but economics too, and they are the biggest player in the market right now, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
But my question goes, I don't know if you have heard about a new book that a professor from Harvard, Subos, has published, that it's called Surveillance Capitalism. Mainly what she's saying, well, it's a book that I really recommend to everybody in the room if they want to look into the future. But mainly what she's saying is that we have moved into a new economic order where human experience, it's raw material that it's being used by corporations and governments. But and I would like your take on that, based on what you just said about functionality, ethics, and purpose. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, let me play back. I think you're asking about sort of the move from what we know as social media today to the more surveillance capitalism world, and how, you know, that would factor into this dynamic. Yeah, I have not read that book, but I've had a number of people recommend it to me, and honestly, I think as technology advances and we have more and more ability to track different attributes, that the need for companies to address how we are going to handle those issues becomes more and more paramount. And I would love to see a world where companies that are proactively saying, this is coming, we need to, as a society, figure out how we're going to treat this and where the balance of information versus privacy is going to be a great move for brands. And I go back to my Microsoft example where recently they proactively said, we need to develop standards around facial recognition. And we don't have it all figured out yet, but we know it's important, and we have a point of view in asking governments, other technology providers to come together and figure out what the standards are so that we can have a way to govern that. And I do think it's going to have to be a partnership between government and technology companies.
Much. Please,
yes.
Big hand for Matt Ashworth. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great job. Thank you.